Welcome to Redirect, Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined this week by co-host and fellow immigration attorney Matthew Archambault. Also, Amy Maldonado. She's an immigration attorney in Michigan, huge friend of the show. She's been on before and she's great. She does some business immigration law and other things that Matthew and I, frankly, don't know much about. And so she's coming on to talk about the new expanded immigration ban, which was announced on Monday, which feels like about 5 lifetimes ago. There was also a pretty terrible decision from the Supreme Court, which we talk about a little bit. But yeah, it's all very depressing. And so it's one of those things, we get into this with Amy, but it feels like these are all big deals, each one of these stories. And there's other stories that we didn't even get to talk about, like what's going on with the use of expedited removal or basically authorizing ICE officers to rapidly deport people found in the interior of the country if they can't prove they've been here for at least 2 years. That was another developing case from this week that we didn't even get a chance to talk about. And if they were isolated incidents, they'd be big deals, but, perhaps fairly limited in their scope. But what we're seeing right now is just an avalanche, one thing on top of the other, on top of the other. And it's hard, even as practitioners who do this all week long, it's literally what we do all day. It's hard to keep track of these changes. And so as we examine each individual change or policy, we shouldn't get too wrapped up in whether this alone is a quote unquote big deal. We should try to always remember to see the forest from the trees. And they are big deals. Folks, if you like the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, share it with a friend, become a patron at patreon.com/redirect, throw a couple dollars towards the production, and we'd really appreciate it. Well, we got DACA back, right?
Woo!
Did want to mention that real quick. They're not going to publish anything about it, right? They're not going to give any guidelines.
Just we can tweets. That's it.
So I think I was really outraged about this, and I was like, hey, they have to immediately open up and accept new applications. And then somebody who knows stuff about lawyering in front of the Supreme Court, which I do not, pointed out to me that the mandate doesn't issue until 21 days after the decision. So probably they're hanging out until the decision's final, by which time they will have recanceled it some other way.
Right.
That's my theory.
The cancellation supposedly takes a while, the proper way.
Yeah.
There's going to be a weird time where it's we're in the process of canceling.
Yes.
So you can technically apply. But we're going to signal very clearly that we're going to have the head of USCIS saying, if you apply, we're going to deport you.
There is no head of USCIS.
Well, the cooch. I'm doing air quotes around head.
Yeah, I could see them saying we're not accepting any new applications, blah, blah, blah. And just so they can get sued again. And just I don't know. I have a hard time believing they're going to operate in good faith. I know that.
I do think it's just going to be this. You can apply technically because the dumb liberal John Roberts Supreme Court, you have to. But just so you know, we're totally deporting these people. So go ahead. It's just going to be a messaging thing. And yeah.
So Ken Cuccinelli, the senior official performing the duties of the Director, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Director Vacant, that's his title. I'm pretty sure he's not going to take this. But can I just take a moment to thank Jeff Sessions for his complete and total incompetence in canceling the DACA program? Because that's pretty awesome. And I am feeling really optimistic and upbeat because we've got 6 months to go. We can tie stuff up in litigation for 6 more months.
Sure.
And then we'll have, the amazing... No, wait, I can't say anything. The new administration will hopefully take positive action.
Well, you take that positive attitude and get it right out of here.
Yeah.
Well, Joe Biden will incrementally fix immigration. You can't do it all at once. You have to just little little baby steps, because you want to signal to the Republicans that he's serious about immigration enforcement, right?
By the end of my first term, we're going to have one-time 6-month work permits for dreamers who've been here for more than 30 years.
So
It's going to bust into voluntary departure after the 6 months are up. Because that's what I'm all about. Hold on, I'm not done with my Joe Biden.
Okay,
that's what I'm all about. Solutions to tough problems coming together. Okay, I'm done. Sorry.
I refuse to bash Joe Biden until January 1st, 2021, or January 21st.
Fair enough.
Yeah. No bashing Joe Biden until after the election.
All right. But
then we'll incrementally bash him.
No, full force.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so next year, I'm going to really hone in on that shouting Joe Biden impression. But for now, I want to just put something in to relief for people here. At the same time, we've got this agency dragging their feet on whether or not literal children can get work permits, which, by the way, like, how long would it take to process a DACA? A DACA costs $500. It's
pretty fast right now. It's like literally a couple weeks it has been.
I just mean in terms of like the work that an officer would need to put into it. An officer looks over the application, it probably takes 20 minutes, right?
20 might be generous.
So you've got thousands of people now who are like, knocking at the door, ready to, that meme from Futurama, take my money, right? It's like that. Take my money to USCIS. And at the same time, they're like, no. And also, we're about to fire thousands of people because we ran out of money.
Right. 75% of the workforce, supposedly, is going to get furloughed.
Which it's, on the one hand, it's like, guys, here's the solution. And on the other hand, you realize they don't want a solution. This is the whole point, right?
Well, so the agency was saying they needed a $1.5 billion bailout. And my representative is Alyssa Slotkin. And so I emailed her office and I was all, maybe they shouldn't have canceled premium processing because they made a lot of money for that. And if they extended that to work and travel stuff, they would make a ton of money because there are a lot of people who can't afford to pay that would be willing to pay to not wait, marriage-based case 8-9 months for a work travel card that comes a week after your, actual approval. But they never actually made a request, the administration of Congress. They have not asked to give the agency any money to avoid this because they don't want to approve any benefits. Right. I hate them.
Right.
Have I mentioned I hate them?
I love them personally. I just want them that are listening. But
yeah, a big shout out to the Vermont Service Center who's handling my U visas. Thank you. In Nebraska. Can't forget Nebraska.
No, I don't hate the agency. It's the administration that's killing the benefits adjudication by the agency.
Right now, you can't see me. I'm raising the roof for the California Service Center. I've got a couple service requests. It'd be cool if you guys got around to them. No rush, but love you guys. Yeah, no, it's pretty bad. What happens if all those employees are furloughed and, basically stuff is just not going to get done, right?
Which, is that why we're waiting until August to reinstate DACA theoretically for a hot minute? Because nobody will be around to adjudicate the applications.
Right.
If a tree falls in the forest and sits there for 6 months,
then what?
I don't know.
Right.
You're a philosophy major. Then what?
Yeah, there you go. I don't know. I might open a flower shop.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about escapism real quick. Matthew and I are going to serve blended coffee drinks in Belize.
Okay.
A surf shop too.
Surf shop, sure. Yep.
Yep.
And Amy's going to...
I don't know anything about any of those things, but...
Right.
Well, my wife has gotten really into making her own espresso at home. And she's kind of like as she's testing it, she's drinking more and more coffee. So by noon, she's like totally insane.
So I stand corrected.
But I do think we'll be ready for that. So anyhow, I like to spend a little headspace there from time to time. Just want to interrupt this podcast with a little vacation. All right. So back at it. Amy, we wanted to talk to you about a couple things. One is the new and improved immigration ban. There's two things that annoy me on Twitter that hopefully we can cut right through and find a nice middle ground. One is I'm seeing people say like, there's no more immigration period. And then other people saying it's like they're the hipster immigration reporters who are like, this is actually not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And the truth is somewhere in between. So
yeah.
Talk about.
So first, can I just say that none of this actually applies to my client base, which is kind of awesome because of all my business immigration attorney friends, I'm the only one not having a meltdown because my clients do extraordinary ability O1s, professional athlete P1s. I do a lot of EB1As, and none of those are impacted by the new non-immigrant visa executive order, which also has these weird paragraphs in it that say, by the way, we're going to authorize the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Labor and the Secretary of Homeland Security to go back and look at all these EB2 and EB3 labor certifications and figure out if we want to, say that the H-1Bs who are here and working are actually negatively impacting the economy. So we should get rid of them, which all of that is completely a violation of the law. But, so this new...
Talk about who are those people? For people who don't know,
okay.
Like me and Matthew, H-1Bs, EBs, what does that mean?
Okay, so this is the spiel I give to all my new clients who know nothing about immigration. Basically, you got four things you can be immigration-wise. U.S. citizen, undocumented / what people call illegal, which makes me really aggravated. Or you can be an immigrant, you're a permanent resident. Or you can have one of the, what I like to call the alphabet soup of non-immigrant visas. The P1 professional athlete, the O1 extraordinary ability, the H1B specialty worker, professional in a specialty occupation, which requires a bachelor's degree or higher. H2Bs, who are temporary, seasonal, or one-time need workers. And Js, which are exchange visitors, F1 students. There are lots. It actually goes from like A through V. Is that the last one?
What's the sheep herder visa?
That's a SH visa.
That's not true.
Yeah.
Well, so the idea is there's all these people who can be here, but
right in different.
Forever.
Oh, Is are international journalists.
Oh.
There's like a Q visa for people who work at Disney, and also like
oh my God,
people on Irish visas or something. I don't know. Anyway, the point is there are lots and lots of categories to be here temporarily.
Right.
And then a limited subset of those categories allow you to also pursue permanent residence at the same time. That's the H-1B, the L. The other categories are something called non-immigrant intent, which means at the time you get your visa or you cross the border, you have to establish to the satisfaction of the U.S. government that you intend to go home.
Right.
The last executive order was about immigration. It was about people who are outside the United States who are coming to the U.S. And since the very beginning of the Trump administration, they have been trying to kill legal immigration. And it hasn't worked, largely.
No. They just want you to do it the right way.
Right.
Right.
But now...
pay attention to what you're saying, but they just want you to do it the right way.
Now that we have the coronavirus apparently means that whatever the U.S. government wants to do with immigration, they make up an excuse for.
Oh, nice.
So, it's too dangerous to let people into the United States, but we can deport people out. That's fine. The economy is fine for Trump because he wants us to think the economy is fine, but it's so bad that we need to protect U.S. workers. My favorite example is I actually know a lady here in East Lansing who was laid off as a state police dispatcher. And I always say, yeah, she can totally take a job as a material scientist in Silicon Valley. Sure. Because people are widgets and so are their skills. Mm-hmm. So it's all super frustrating. But so this executive order that came out June 22nd applies to only a few visa categories. It's H-1B, which is the professional in a specialty occupation that requires a bachelor's degree or higher. The government actually just lost a big lawsuit on this. I think it was Bradley Banias's case, right, Matthew? It was IT.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. They lost a big, because when Trump came into office, he really wanted to crack down on H-1Bs for tech. So they issued a memo, and the memo imposed a bunch of ultra vires requirements, and they denied a bunch of cases, and then they got sued and they lost. And they actually just rescinded the memo. Yeah. Which is awesome. But now we don't have to worry about it because they're not going to give anyone an H-1B thanks to this executive order because coronavirus. So H-1Bs, H-2Bs, which are the temporary workers, those are used. Actually, I was surprised by this because this is the visa category that's used by most of the Trump properties. They're for ski resort workers, summer amusement park workers, Mar-a-Lago, the vineyards, they might use the H-2As, but I thought they used the H-2B. And then the J-1 visas actually cover a range of various categories. So there are specific categories that are affected according to the executive order. But since the executive order has been issued, we are finding out on Twitter that the State Department interprets this differently than what the language of the executive order actually says. And they're just not going to give anybody a visa until January. We'll go into that in a minute. So then L visas, which are for multinational corporate executives, managers, and specialized knowledge workers. So I had this Danish guy once who worked at this company that built these huge printing presses for media. And he came over as a specialized worker because they were very specialized and nobody knew how they worked here, apparently. But so those visas. Now, the H-1Bs and the L visas are the two visas that specifically allow immigrant intent. There are a couple other visas that are kind of quasi-immigrant intent. That's a O and P. And so it's interesting that those are targeted here. So the J visas that are prohibited are interns, business trainees, teachers. These are used a lot by bilingual teachers, camp counselors, au pairs, and summer work and travel programs, and then any of their dependents. And so the executive order says it only applies to somebody who is outside the United States on the effective date, which was, I think the date they set was June 24th, does not have a non-immigrant visa that's valid on the effective date, and does not have an official travel document other than a visa. And that would be like an advanced parole document or a boarding FOIL letter or whatever.
Right.
Let me ask you. So say someone was granted an H-1B visa to start in October 1st, right? That's when the start date would be. And they're home in their country, India, what may be, waiting to come over. They have the visa. Would they be able to come over?
So if they already have the visa stamp in their passport, theoretically. However, USCIS suspended premium processing for H-1Bs, and you can't file H-1Bs before April 1st. So that just got reinstated within the past couple weeks, premium processing for H-1Bs. The likelihood that anybody from fiscal year 2021, which starts October 1, is going to have a visa stamp is pretty much zero.
So a business that has been planning, in advance to have these workers come over on October 1st is kind of, how do you say in
SOL?
I was going to say, but SOL.
Yeah.
Sure, that works.
Okay. I mean, keep it PG, Matthew. However,
producer.
What the?
So this is the fun part. Whoever's in charge of the Department of State's travel Twitter account has been answering questions.
That's me, by the way.
Right. Yeah. So you heard me say right? It only applies to people who are outside the U.S. and they don't have a visa and they don't have another travel document, period. So you will be unsurprised to know that the Department of State has determined that they're going to take this as an or. If you are in the United States, let's say you're on a B2 visa and you want to get an H-1B, you could try to change status here, but you cannot leave and come back with a visa. They're also taking the position, this is affecting quite a few people who are Indian in particular, who were outside the U.S. and were renewing their visas abroad. They are subject to this, even though they've already been working in the U.S.
Now, there's also some immigrant visa restrictions, right? Yeah,
so there was a previous executive order that restricted the issuance of immigrant visas because coronavirus. So, for example, one of the restrictions is that for immediate relatives of U.S. citizens, spouses and children are exempt, but not mothers or fathers, not parents, who are also immediate relatives. So I have a player for the Nats who just became a citizen a year ago, and he petitioned for his mom and his daughter. And his daughter's processing continues, but his mother is barred from the U.S. because we don't need 70-year-old Dominican housewives hanging out with their sons
Right.
in Florida.
It does sound like a problem, actually.
Yeah.
I've got a
Because
client.
that might hurt the labor market.
Right. I've got a client in the same situation. Actually, he was called back to the consulate to do a new medical exam. We had to do a 601. It's a long story, but so that was going to be the last step. Just make sure you didn't get gonorrhea in the few months you've been down there. And the clinics closed because of COVID, like right, as he was going. And so it was like, okay, well, we'll just have to wait till they reopen. And then this thing happened, and then they extended it. So this guy's had been living in the United States for like 25 years. All his family's here, and now he's stuck down there till December. It is weird, I think, in the immigrant visa context, or I guess in all these contexts, that on the one hand, we've spent the last 3 years proving that our clients won't drain the public benefit coffers and that they're super hardworking and industrious. And now it's like we also have to prove that they're not going to actually get a job,
Well, I mean, with this labor market, right? And Amy, you can probably speak to this. In the tech industry, especially, unemployment must be out of control. And that's why we had to do this, right?
Yeah, sure it is.
Yeah. It's like the lowest it's ever been in the tech industry, right? I mean,
yeah.
It's like 2.8%, I think, in the tech industry.
So there's like a word in law that they use. It's pretextual.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm writing this down.
Yeah.
Hold on. Okay. What is that?
We might need to explain that for some of our listeners and Stephen.
For some of the dumb people listening, what does that mean?
They're lying.
Oh.
Yeah. So back in April, and what the most recent executive order did was it extended the April order until the end of the year. And, may we have a different administration and go back to fighting the stuff we fought before. But anyway, so Trump suspended immigration to the United States using his emergency powers because coronavirus.
Powers.
If they were not here, they didn't have a valid visa or a travel document, right? And then they exempted certain people. So
Melania.
if you're a lawful permanent resident, you can come in. I don't know why that would even be an issue. Like, I don't understand who writes these. If you're coming as a doctor, nurse, or healthcare professional, but only if it's connected to COVID with your dependents. If you're an EB-5 and you have millions of dollars to invest, come on in. Spouses and children of U.S. citizens. And then, if we want spouses for military people and children, they can come in. They're SIV, isn't that the Afghani visa that they never give out to anybody?
Sure.
And national interest, law enforcement cases, those people can still come in.
Now, is this the same time where time is moving slower or faster? I can't decide, but is this the same thing as when he tweeted he was suspending all immigration and everyone in Europe freaked out and bought plane tickets? And then
I don't know.
Or was that a different thing?
It's hard to keep track of this stuff. When did that happen?
I don't know. It's a million years ago. But all right, sorry.
So when you guys asked me if I wanted to come on this week, I was like, about the Supreme Court decision yesterday. What? And you were like, no, about Monday. And I was just like, that was 4 days ago. So much has happened since then. Who remembers Monday?
Yeah, the Supreme Court decision, I don't know if we should really get into it, but let's just say it sucks.
Let me ask.
Justice
It's
League
horrible.
wrote it. I think that's all anyone really needs to know.
Let me ask you something first about this ban. So I mentioned at the beginning, there are the immigration hipsters, it's not that big of a deal. And then there's the people panicking. And I'm wondering, what is on the panic scale or the big deal scale, where do you put this? 1 to 10?
So for people who are here, it's not that big of a deal yet. I would say it's like a 3, as long as you didn't leave the country and get stuck outside without a visa so that you got caught up in the technicality. Then it's a 10. For companies who have invested, hundreds of thousands of dollars and time and effort in recruiting, and, attorneys have prepared petitions and filed them and they have approvals and they expect their workers to be able to enter on October 1, it's a big deal. It's going to affect them negatively economically, which supposedly the government cares about. They don't care. And I expect to see litigation. I'm a little bit surprised we haven't seen it already.
Mm-hmm.
But there will be litigation to enjoin this because there's no rational... I mean, not that it matters because, we're losing a lot lately. But yeah, this is completely pretextual. If we can get an injunction and drag it out for 6 months, hopefully it'll just go away. But yeah, it's not the end of the world. It's terrible, but I am optimistic that it is so terrible that we're going to get an injunction and we can run out the clock on these people.
It feels a little bit like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And
yeah,
when people are like, this doesn't even apply to, blah, blah, blah. And it's not that big of a deal. You have to take a step back and realize, no one of these things is, literally the Holocaust, right? Like there's not one of these moves that amounts to a total termination of all immigration. But if you look at the asylum restrictions from a couple of weeks ago, and then there's an assault on the business side with these types of restrictions and families too.
Yeah.
I do think it's important to be outraged at each one because they're trial balloons. I really do think for people like Stephen Miller in the White House to see sort of where can we push the envelope and how are people going to react? And if our reaction every time is well, okay, I don't even understand all those visas you just listed off. It's no big deal.
Right.
And the next thing you know, we have literally no immigration.
So let me give you an example of one of the impacts of the most recent executive order for non-immigrants. And I fortunately escaped this through a technicality. If you were a hospital and you were bringing in a foreign doctor on an H-1B who is not here yet, they can't come. It's going to negatively affect healthcare. The only exceptions involve providing medical care for people who actually have COVID and are in the hospital, or if you're going to research about COVID. But my Mississippi hospital, who needs their oncologist because their other oncologist wants to retire, we've got a new oncologist coming in on an H-1B. But for the fact that my client is Canadian, she wouldn't be able to come, my nice Canadian oncologist. So there is a loophole kind of, but apparently it's intentional because CBP did confirm that this is accurate. Because Canadians are visa exempt, they're not trying to enter the US on a visa, and therefore the visa restrictions don't apply to them. But if you're trying to recruit a doctor from, England or wherever else, Mexico, the Caribbean, who knows, that doctor can't come.
Cool.
And, the entire healthcare system is stressed because of the pandemic, not just the people who only directly deal with coronavirus.
Right.
You seem to be indicating that this may be a bad policy.
Yeah. It's also really poorly written and kind of incomprehensible. And the State Department is signaling they're going to just not give anybody a visa until January. So that, I'm thinking maybe we need to switch to mandamus for everything.
Right.
Follow the law, do stuff that you're supposed to do.
I'm not one of these smart lawyers who's going to do whatever you just said. But what do we make of the president going around saying we got to reopen, masks are for pussies, and everything's fine, but also, we can't let these people in. They're going to take jobs and spread disease or whatever. That seems like it'd be one of my pieces of evidence, right? Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
I mean, they lie. They lie and lie and lie and lie. They don't stop lying.
There's this segment of the right wing that is going around saying that the coronavirus is basically a hoax. It's no big deal. You people are pussies for wanting to wear masks and all that. But they will, in the next sentence, use the coronavirus to, justify not allowing anyone else into the country.
Right.
It's well, is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? You have to kind of tell us. And
it's like that P word that Amy said earlier, that P word.
Oh, yeah.
So a few months ago, we filed a lawsuit, Rapid Defense Network, Gregory Copeland and Sarah Gilman, Bridget Cambria, me, Morgan Lewis came in on it, Shay from Dilly Pro Bono Project, and Raices was part of it also, Manoj Govindaya and Curtis Dobler. Anyway, we filed a lawsuit on behalf of the people in family detention. And at the same time, Bridget and I were pushing for a TRO in Flores, which was filed, but there's a whole other thing going on there. So anyway, we were like, hey, coronavirus, pandemic, why don't you let out these families in family detention who are not a danger and they're actually also not a flight risk, but if you think they are, you can put an ankle monitor on them because there's a pandemic and we have 500 pages of expert testimony and documentation that congregate care settings like nursing homes and prisons spread coronavirus and are incredibly dangerous. So our judge in DC, Judge Boasberg, he was like, yeah, I'm not really inclined to let anybody out. Like, let's see how the numbers go down. Let's have a status conference in a month. So we did that. We came back in another month. We came back again. And our latest hearing was yesterday. And now there is COVID in family detention because in part, the core civic staffers, et cetera, are carpooling from San Antonio in like buses with 15 people on them.
Nice.
So the staff is bringing coronavirus into the detention center and now people have it.
Good job, everybody. Nice.
So, yeah. So we were like, we told you, we told you this was going to happen and you didn't care.
We're going to have to deport these infected people so they don't infect the rest of us.
Exactly.
Right. It seems like the argument is now that they're a danger, but for a different reason.
Yeah. So coronavirus wasn't a good enough reason to let, I think our youngest client is 6 months old. 6 months old shouldn't be let out of detention for coronavirus, but we should shut down all immigration into the U.S.
What is happening? All right. Do we want to talk about SCOTUS or not so much?
I have a SADS. I love Sonia Sotomayor, though.
You have a SADS? Does that mean...
I have a SADS. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, man.
No.
What is up?
Well, I one thing, again, with this decision that we should probably maybe dispel some things, it does not put an end to asylum. This is not what puts an end to asylum. Trust me, it's coming. Because I've been reading headlines and all that where it's like basically asylum is over, or like you can no longer appeal your asylum, no appeals for asylum. That's not exactly what it means. It's really just talking about being able to use habeas, and it's a really terrible decision. It's mean, but I don't think it's as overarching as the media is going to make it out, but it still is terrible.
I don't agree. Okay. And this is why I don't agree. I don't agree because the decision says there's no judicial review. This provision of the INA that says the habeas review that's left is, are you a U.S. citizen? Are you a refugee or asylee? Or are you a permanent resident? Those are the only things that are reviewable by a court. So the court just told Stephen Miller, whatever you're going to do in expedited removal, we're not going to look it over. You're all good. And what we've been seeing up to this point, we had a separate lawsuit last fall that MMV v. Barr that is currently up in the DC circuit, where we said, hey, look, since the transit ban went into effect, which is the ban that says if you go through Mexico then or any other country, you can't get asylum in the U.S. You're going to be subject to like a reasonable fear standard, yada, yada. So once that went into effect, they started pulling a bunch of crazy stuff. And you'll be unsurprised to know that one of the officials behind this was Ken Cuccinelli, acting, blah, blah, senior official doing, I can't even remember his job title. I have to look it up every time. So yeah, he started doing things like changing all of the procedures. And one of the things that he did is he said, we've got these asylum officers. They're trained in dealing with victims of trauma and, interviewing children and stuff. How about we just give CBP officers about 20 hours of training and call them asylum officers now? So they have been designated as asylum officers. And now, instead of the non-adversarial interviews that, asylees are entitled to under the regulations, like Bridget interviewed somebody, had a client at Berks yesterday who had a 13-hour re-interview. 13 hours. They're doing these with children with no breaks. They're basically like interrogating people until they break down and they can find some lack of consistency that allows them to say you're not credible. So the lack of oversight, this telegraphs to the administration, do whatever you want, and we're not gonna stop you. We're not gonna look. We're not gonna care. And so I agree with you. It doesn't end asylum yet, but once that message gets through, which I think it has,
right?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so I thought the decision was limited. I mean, it's limited to petitions for, release, essentially, not like if you lose your case, you can still appeal.
So expedited removal has no judicial review. There's a provision of the INA that strips judicial review from that. The limited review is habeas, or there's 1252E3 8 U.S. Code that says that if there's a change in the policies and procedures, you can file a federal district court action within 60 days and challenge those written policies and procedures within 60 days of their implementation. So you can't challenge the individual, denial of credible fear or the rubber stamping IJ review that we're getting, but you can challenge new policies. And that's what our MMV case was about. And Judge Amy Berman Jackson, Roger Stone's judge, she tossed our case because the government did not reduce their instructions to writing. So there were secret policies or verbally conveyed commands. And what we understand is that Ken Cuccinelli calls people up a lot and tells them what to do. And so in Dilley, he visited Dilley at the end of August, beginning of September last year. And within days, all of the procedures at Dilley changed. But the government says that there were no written documents that told anybody to change them. And so Judge Berman Jackson said we didn't carry our burden for jurisdiction. And that's why we're up on appeal.
Yeah, I think this kind of illustrates the whole death by 1,000 cuts and all these things, because there is so much going on that it is hard to focus on which one is the worst, right? And that there are horrors at the border that we don't even know about. Even people that are in it down there have no idea. And I think it's going to take years for us to learn exactly how bad things are, because I think it's going to eclipse the whole family separation bullshit that went on. What's going on at the border and beyond, pushing people back to Guatemala and El Salvador and all that stuff is absolutely horrendous. And it is just so hard to focus on that, because as soon as you look at it, there's something else going on over here, over there, and it's really tough. And big shout out to the people down there at the border who are really putting in the time, and to people like Amy, people like Bridget Cambria, who are really kind of attacking these things. But for everything that's being attacked, there's probably 3 or 4 others that we don't even know about. And that's what's really scary.
So you guys know about the expulsion case, right? The ACLU case. Because once Trump said coronavirus, pandemic, CDC, emergency powers, and they quote unquote shut down the border, they just started deporting people with no process, including children. And so there was that 10-year-old kid who was deported to Honduras by himself when his mom, who was an MPP, sent him to the border because it was so dangerous in Mexico. So she sends him to be processed through as an unaccompanied child. And CBP takes this 10-year-old kid and basically ships him to Honduras alone. So the ACLU actually just a few days ago, they got an order. Maybe it was a TRO or something. But the judge said, you can't just do that and ignore the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and all the other laws that apply to unaccompanied children and asylum and withholding of removal and relief under the Convention Against Torture. At the very least, you have to, take all of the laws together and synthesize them with the emergency powers. And the Trump administration just said, woohoo, emergency powers, we do what we want.
It reminds me a little bit of, so we see a lot of these old stipulated removal orders from the early to mid 2000s, where immigration officer, they'd pick somebody up and they'd say, well, you're going to be detained 5 years unless you sign this document. And then they'd sign away all their rights and they'd be deported immediately. And so many people have been, really screwed over by that. And it wasn't until years later that the Ninth Circuit was like, that's not great. We think that there's some problems with that process. And, some people have been able to sort of, maybe get old cases reopened, but people are still being reinstated on those orders, 10, 15 years later. Anyways, the point is when immigration starts to engage in this kind of stuff, it's not like a 6-month period and then things go back to normal. These things echo for maybe decades, the consequences of, these types of policies. So that's really troublesome, I think. So
Biden 2020.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Well, guys, this sucked.
Yeah. Well, at least. No, there's nothing. I have nothing.
I was like, really? There's going to be something? No, of course there's nothing.
Well,
I mean, the administration just filed a brief in the Supreme Court to completely undo the ACA.
that's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. And also, it is nice. There's a lot of divisiveness and the country is like really divided, obviously, but it is nice to see people come together for common cause of defeating the virus and sort of with a basic understanding of some real fundamental science and what we need to do to combat that and protect our vulnerable populations. So,
Ooh. So I'm 2 blocks away from a bar in East Lansing, Michigan, which is where Michigan State University is. And we're now at 51 coronavirus cases from students hanging out at this bar within the last 7 days. So, yeah.
So what are the drink specials now?
That is a good question. I actually read their website and they were like, we're doing everything. We're going to wear masks. We were at 50% capacity. We're sanitizing stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a disaster. People here think that wearing a mask is tyranny. It's like, there's slavery and then just below that mask wearing, I guess. And, it's all the liberal governor who's trying to control our lives or whatever. And meanwhile, our case, Yakima is just a total hotspot. And I called
Really?
Yeah, it's really, really bad. One of the worst counties in the country.
Oh my God.
I called the local talk radio about it because that's my hobby horse. And they said, well, the numbers are really high amongst Hispanics. And maybe we need to go through Hispanic communities with a loudspeaker warning them about the virus because, they're dumb apparently. So that's where this is headed. The whole blame the Mexicans. That's our policy, I guess.
It's an old song and dance.
Anyways.
Operation Deportation, Operation Wetback from the 50s.
Right.
They like to blame us.
Anyways, all right, guys. Well, thanks.
Wow, this is one of the more depressing shows that we've done in a while. Thanks.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
It's right up there. Amy, we appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. It was good.